Hello everyone and welcome back for another Trinity Stamps video. This is Cassie. Today we're going to be using the Porta-Hello stamp set. I'm obviously in love with this. I've used it quite a bit. And then we're going to bring in an oldie but a goodie, the Mouse House. I love this one and we have the matching dies to go with it. And then I do have the Modern Embossed A7 die. So I went ahead and die cut out some watercolor paper using that Modern Embossed A7 die, and then I'm going to bring in some Fade Out ink by Ink on 3. To be honest with you, I hadn't planned to do no line watercoloring. This was just going to be my background. I was going to stamp it with this, and then I thought, let's put some color down and see how this goes. I'm not super proficient in no line watercoloring, but let me tell you, this particular ink, the Fade Out ink by Ink on 3, is fabulous for it, and I'll tell you why as we go along. I'm going to bring in my Daniel Smith watercolors that I have and a water brush. I'm going to end up switching out this water brush because this is just leaking water everywhere, but we're going to start with some color. I'm going to put a little bit of color down, and I'm only going to show you the coloring of one of our sets of mushrooms because it's basically the same. You don't need to see the whole thing. And here's where I'm going to end up switching out because it's just spewing water all over the place. But do you see what's happening there? I've stamped down with that Fade Out ink, and when I put down color on top of that, everywhere that there is ink, it grabs that pigment from the watercolor, which makes it so much easier. So if you've been intimidated by no line watercoloring, which I will admit I totally have been, I've done it a couple times and been successful sometimes and not so successful other times. But this, I feel like, gives you the opportunity to be successful every time. And I say that because your lines don't disappear as you color, at least with watercolor. Now, I haven't really tried this with Copics. I'm not sure how, or alcohol markers. I'm not sure how that translates with alcohol markers, but for watercoloring, I absolutely love how it will grab that color, it'll grab that pigment and make it darker wherever the ink is, so you don't lose your lines. That was always my biggest issue with trying to do no line watercoloring, is that my lines would disappear. I'll definitely have to do some experimenting with the alcohol inks, but watercolor, honestly, is my very favorite medium of color. I know I don't do it as often on this channel, but it's definitely my favorite medium when it comes to coloring. All right, so now I'm going to bring in the green, and once again, you'll notice it just grabs that pigment wherever the lines are so that you don't lose them. And just like with watercolor, every time you usually have to put down a wash of color to start, and you work in layers. And I'm not even grabbing different colors of the same green, but what I mean by that is I've grabbed green, or a green, and I'm sticking with that same green the entire time. You could even step it up a notch and use darker colors if you wanted. I'm using one color basically for every one of these that I am coloring. So it's just, I'm using the same green. I used that same like purple red, and we'll do the same thing with all the flowers and everything else. So I've made this fairly simple. But I do love how just adding that color down on top of your image, the pigment is grabbed by wherever the ink is. And like I said, that just makes it that much easier for me. So now I really want to play around with doing a lot more with no line watercoloring. Very curious to see how it works with the Copics. I imagine it is a little bit different, obviously, but this has been super, super fun. And so I'll just keep coloring with that same green until we're done. The thing I am trying to be most careful with when doing this painting is that I'm trying to avoid, wetting one area when I just worked on another that's close by, because then you'll have your ink kind of bleeding into each other, or your watercolor bleeding into each other. All right, so now I'll move on to the flowers, and the same sort of thing. I'm going to put down a wash of this like golden color, and then I'll come back in and make it darker where I think it needs to be darker. But again, just the ink is grabbing that color, and it's doing a beautiful job. And then I'll do the underside of the mushrooms, and I will leave some white space, not a lot. And I'll do that for all of them. And then I'll bring in some brown for underneath the mushroom and kind of bring that color down just a little bit and water it out so I can get a variation in that color, just a little bit darker in some areas, add some shadowing. But I tried to make this fairly simple on myself because I really just wanted this to be the background. Like I said, I had no intention really of doing no-line watercoloring. I thought about maybe slapping down a little bit of color, but then once I got started, I just couldn't stop. And here you can see it again with this purple that I'm adding at the bottom. It just grabs, the ink just grabs the pigment. And then it leaves all of my little stones there so that I can come back in later and I can add more color over the top of it. This stuff is just wonderful. I love it. But again, this wasn't supposed to be my main, it's the background. And you'll see because I'm going to bring in the mice from our little mouse house stamp set and the snail. And those are going to be our main images. But this background really does still shine, which is great. And it's fun because I combined a stamp set that was a lot more intricate with a stamp set that's a lot more whimsical. So check it out. It's not perfect, but it's super fun. And the more I practice, obviously, with anything, the better I'll get. I went ahead and stamped out all of my images. And this time I used a black ink. I used the Blackout. And then I'm going to use the matching dies, tack that down, run that through my die cutting machine. And then we can start building our little scene with these little mice and our snail. They just go perfectly with this. And then I did grab out one of the sentiments from our Porta-Hello. And then I stamped that down. And then I'm going to put some foam tape on the back of each of our little mice and our snail. So that way they can be popped up for a little bit of dimension. Even our little snail, even though he would probably be better if he wasn't, since he's on top of the toadstool or on top of the mushroom. Which I guess it's the same thing, isn't it? But we'll just put a little half one on him and pop him up as well. And then I'm going to grab in my 5x7 card base. And I'm going to take our Porta-Hello stamp and I'm going to stamp that on the inside with that Fadeout ink. My stamp block is definitely a little bit smaller than my image, but it's not that big of a deal. And everything stamps fine. And, again, this is the inside of the card, so it really doesn't matter. And then I'm going to glue down my panel to my base. There's going to be a nice white border all the way around because I did make this a little smaller than my 5x7 card base. And then I decide to bring in some champagne baubles, and I'm going to put those down with my pickup stick after I've put those into my tidy tray. And then I'll glue those down using that liquid glue that I've been using. And when that is done, that is going to finish off our card for today. So I hope you liked it. It's a little different. And if you did, please like this video with a thumbs up and leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. And be sure to check out all that Trinity Stamps has going on over on their Facebook page, Instagram, and their blog. Thanks for spending time with me today. Bye, everyone.